If you're a guest with us, welcome. We're delighted that you're here and delighted to get to worship with you. As you can tell, we try to be very serious about Jesus and yet not take ourselves too seriously. We want to be the type of people who gather and scatter, who come together on Sunday and wrestle with Jesus and his dreams for our world and his dreams for our lives and his picture of what it looks like to be his as we live out our days, and then spend the other 6 days doing that, whether that's at home with kids or in the workplace or in the neighborhood, whatever that looks like. So, way to go on the Outdoors Festival, you guys. So, yeah, way to go. So proud to be a part of a community of people that don't just yap their mouth about mattering, but do it. So good job there. Also to that end, let me just talk a little bit about the Mount Helena tree tag thing. As you know, when we marked those trees for the city, we marked the trees that were going to get salvaged, that were not going to get cut down. And so the first 25-acre plot, you probably see it emerging as you look at Mount Helena from downtown. They're done with that. And so what they need now is people who will come along and pull the tags off so that they're not there forever. It's, bring a backpack and pull tags and hike around and all that. So we're not going to do like a Saturday effort type of deal where we all meet in Mount Helena parking lot and go do this thing together. We thought we could make it a little messier than this. It's going to be a lot of work for Sarah, but we think we could do it, where we just invite you to let us know that you want to do it, and then she'll be in touch with you and ask when you're going to want to do that. It can be middle of the day. It can be an evening hike with some friends. We were thinking of parents, who have kids out of school and something to do during the day. And so it'll be this kind of messy back and forth communication, and by next weekend, the hope is that we're done with that. So sign-up sheet out there in the lobby, as always, on the Scattering Opportunities table, and you can also always let us know on your info card and get that to us via the box out there, or just leave it on your seat. I also want to address, there's a couple other things. I feel like I'm the announcement man this week. I said about a month ago that Coach Van Diest would be here next week for Father's Day. I didn't lie, but he had to cancel because he wants to go camping with his kids, which is kind of ironic. He really wants to be here, and we're working on dates for when that'll happen, probably this winter. But you're stuck with me next Father's Day, next week. But we are kind of working on doing that up and honoring dads. So if you want us to help you honor your dad next week, we'll be here doing that. Also want to talk about summer. As Mikey said, I gave you permission to camp, as though you need my permission to go camping. But anyway, I know what he means. You know what he means. We've talked a lot in the last 4 or 5 weeks about go camping and be gone on Sunday and don't feel any shame for doing so. It struck me last service that it probably needs to be mentioned then that at the same time, while we want you to feel that incredible freedom and take the freedom that's already yours and enjoy God in those ways and family, I just wanted to say to you, that doesn't mean that we're going to let down around here. I guess it hit me last service, does that imply that we're also going to bring our C game because I'm going to camp all week and then show up on Sunday and figure something out? And likewise, the rest of the staff and the rest of the volunteers that make all this happen. So I just want you to know, it probably goes without saying, I hope it goes without saying, but we're going to continue to press hard this summer. We're going to continue to work hard and be creative and try to have Sundays that you'd be proud of and that you find relevant and that you'd be proud to invite a friend to. So be gone, and we realize that attendance is going to be thinner, and we want you to feel that permission, and at the same time, please know that when you're in town and you have family in town, we're going to be working as hard as we know how to work. Okay, so this morning, we're going to finish up a series of teachings that we started, this conversation, as we like to call them, 5 weeks ago, called Wonder Junkies. And really the design of Wonder Junkies has been to explore God's desire for us to know him via his creation. A friend handed me a little article this week that was talking about, it was an article written from a non-Christ following bent, to be sure, but it was simply talking about the idea that psychologists are beginning to talk about there's something healthy about being outside. That they're beginning to say that people who get outside and are attentive to creation in our language are actually healthier, emotionally, psychologically. It even got into caffeine, that we often go looking to caffeine for a jolt. And what the article talked a lot about was that actually there's a better jolt from getting outside for 15 minutes. And that's really been what we've been trying to do in this series, is have this conversation about God's invitation to know him via creation, by creation, this ancient sacred thing. Psalm 19 was really a jumping off point for us. It's not fair because you get it instantly and I have to find it. Psalm 19 says, "The heavens are telling the glory of God, and the firmament proclaims his handiwork." You use that word every day, don't you? Firmament. It's your challenge for this afternoon. Fit the word firmament into a conversation. And it can't be in reference to fertilizing your lawn. Day to day pours forth speech and night to night declares knowledge. So David, some 1,000+ years ago, he has this moment that we've been trying to describe throughout these series where he's looking at the cosmos and he's kind of dumbfounded and in awe of God. And essentially what he's saying is, I look at the cosmos, like God starts talking to me. God starts revealing himself to me. There's truth about God that hits me. And then he captures the very tension you feel even when I say that. He says, there's no speech nor are there words. Their voice is not heard. In other words, I'm not crazy. Like, yeah, no, I'm not hearing audible voices. I'm not losing my mind. I'm not intoxicated. Like, David embraces the very same tension. It's not that I can actually hear anything, but then he goes back to his original conviction, yet their voice goes out through all the earth and their words to the end of the world. So it's like when he's pressed, he goes, yeah. They're not talking, but they are talking. David, this ancient God-fearer, says, like, being outside, it connects me with God. To use today's terminology, you might say that for David, creation was a spiritual growth exercise. And really that's what we've been doing. We started in the first week by simply saying, observing all of this, and then asking, are we attentive to what God's saying? Are we aware of what he's saying? Are we putting ourselves out there via camping or whatever, whether it's sitting on your deck or whatever it is, and allowing creation to usher us into God's presence in ways that I know you experience, and yet hopefully this series has validated some of those experiences. The following week, we talked about, we asked this kind of big, heady question that simply says this: what if there's a corresponding relationship between one's ability to be present among creation, to enjoy it, and one's ability to be present with the God who wants to be with you, to enjoy God's still small voice presence, if you know what I mean. Like we said, aren't there ultimately disciplines needed to get outside? Whether those are margin disciplines within your own calendar, whether those are technology disciplines within leaving cell phones on the kitchen table, whether those are just simply discipline issues like getting up from the computer or getting up in front of the TV, aren't those very same intentional disciplines the very same things that we have to practice to enjoy God's presence? It's like, don't you have to kind of go looking for God's still small presence in your workday and home life and neighborhood? And so we just explored, what if when someone says God feels far, a very logical, biblical question is, well, how far are you from creation? Because there seems to be a corresponding relationship. In the third week, Dr. Klein was here, and he unpacked the cosmos. Dr. Klein teaches at Carroll, and he just tried to overwhelm us with the cosmos, and then we reflected a little bit on Psalm 8. I invite you to go look at that video podcast if you missed that. And then last week we turned what we called a stewardship corner. I would suggest what we did is we began to deal with the implications of all of this. Like, if God uses creation as a means for people to know him, what then is our responsibility in taking care of that creation? If fish in streams and mountains and the wonder of God's creation, if it's a way that God reveals himself to people, I think a logical question is, what then is our responsibility in taking care of that? Paul, the ancient Christ follower, I don't know if that's the right word there, but really the father of the New Testament in so many ways, he says this: ever since the creation of the world, God's eternal power and divine nature, invisible though they are, have been understood and seen through the things he has made. So even Paul, you could say this of Jesus, you could say this of Moses, you could say it of David and a host of others, even Paul found being outside to be a spiritual growth exercise. Now think of it this way. If you follow Jesus, you probably assume tremendous responsibility in taking care of the text, the Bible. You probably see it as this precious gift from God by which you can know him and follow him and understand the way of salvation. And therefore, right, this is where Christians, well-intentioned though they are, often get ourselves in a lot of trouble, making it our responsibility to protect the Bible, right? I was talking to a friend this week who was in boot camp, and it's designed to break you. And he said the closest he got to losing it in boot camp was when his drill instructor took his Bible and heaved it the length of the barracks. He said, this is as close as I got to just losing it, to breaking. And then he quickly acknowledged, he had his Bible in his hand, it was a paperback Bible like this, he quickly acknowledged, it's not this is holy, I get that, he said. I understand this is paper, and this is ink, and this is human, and yet he's embracing the tension of, but yet the text via God and human in partnership, I understand this is from God, and he was just kind of caught up in the tension, right? I mean, you can see humans have struggled with this for a long time. We write things like Holy Bible on the text. So then, what is our responsibility in stewarding the other thing that God has given us to reveal himself? I think that's really what we're asking in this. If God uses creation to reveal himself, what responsibility do we have? And really last week, the other thing that we said and began to wonder about is, does the gospel just apply to humans? Or is God a God looking for the restoration of all things? And in ways that we can't describe, he invites us to today join with him in the remaking of creation, just like that creed that we read earlier, and be a part of that now. So this morning, we're gonna conclude the series by what I really would like to do this morning is kind of go, okay, practically speaking, what can I do? What does it look like to do my part? In particular, I want to talk to those of you who, like me, you're convinced. Like theologically, you've been convinced that God calls you to be more responsible for some time. Like I can look all the way back to 2005 when all this stuff started to occur to me, and I began to realize, like, wait a minute, this green thing, this isn't humans' idea, and this isn't a new idea. This is an ancient idea, and it's God's idea. Christ followers may have dropped the ball on the issue, but it's God's idea, and it's as old as the text itself. It's as old as God's work with people themselves. And yet, despite the fact that since 2005, I've been convinced that like this is theologically the right thing to do, even ethically the right thing to do, this morning as I walked to work, I dumped a bag of garbage in the dumpster with all kinds of glass and plastic and stuff in it. So this morning, what I want to talk to you is those of you that can relate to like, yep, but I'm still stuck on dead center. I mean, I have a host of excuses. Back in 2005, we already knew we were moving to Helena. We had babies in the house. We had a small house. My wife didn't want to deal with bins. I didn't want to deal with bins. And so we said, how when we get to Helena? We've been here for over a year now. And every time I throw a plastic jug away, I say to myself, need to start recycling. Still haven't done it. I want to help those of you that can relate to that. Also, for some of you, I recognize that life is busy enough. Like you don't ever lay around and go, I need something to do. And especially if you own a house, you're like, oh, to rent. Oh, to rent again, right? Because it's work. You don't need more work to do. And so therefore, this whole green thing, quite frankly, the learning curve feels really steep, and sometimes you feel like it's a whole new lifestyle, which to some degree it is, and you just simply get overwhelmed. I think there's some stuff that we can look at from the text that can help us with that. For some of you, you're still a little cynical about it, still a little jaded. And your thinking would probably go something like this. Isn't it a little arrogant to think that me, a human, can turn a corner environmentally? Isn't it a little arrogant to think that, maybe even a little too optimistic to think that me throwing my milk carton into a recycling bin really does any good? I think it's a real issue and a real problem. For some of you, there's a resource issue here. Because let's be honest, being green is expensive, right? I mean, some of you are going like, I'd love to buy all my food from Real Foods. In fact, I'd love to buy half my food from Real Foods. In fact, I'd like to just buy a banana from Real Foods, right? I mean, it's expensive. I'd love to eat organic. I'd love to avoid big box stores. For me, one of the tensions, Walmart's really easy to bag on. And yet it does a really good job of serving people with regard to their resources. I mean, Walmart is a really good friend to the poor, and yet we recognize that, there's these big box store issues. It's complex and difficult. So this morning, I kind of want to just take some of this stuff on. I listened to a podcast this week, and it was actually a guy who makes films, and I can't remember why they asked him the question or how he got to it, but he made the comment that he values the Bible because of the way it reads people. In fact, his exact words were, the Bible understands humans better than anything or anyone else that I know of. Now, he certainly recognizes the Bible's ability to help us know God, but what he pressed in on for a bit was when I read the Bible, like I all of a sudden understand life in better ways. I understand my patterns of self-destruction. I understand my desires for hope and love and joy. I understand that the decisions I'm making, they're not new decisions. Other people have made those decisions. The successes that I experience, those aren't new. Those are the same things other people have experienced. Really what he pressed in on is like the text. It helps me understand myself and what it means to be human. It's a profound, I think, observation of the text. And for those of you that spend time in the text, you go, yeah, that makes some sense. So what I want to do this morning is there's a couple places where Jesus says some stuff that ultimately I want to suggest speaks to this whole green issue for us today. And then we're going to talk kind of some specifics of things we can put our hands on. I'm going to start in Matthew chapter 7. Jesus says, why do you see the speck in your neighbor's eye, but do not notice the log in your own eye? Or how can you say to your neighbor, let me take the speck out of your eye while the log is in your own eye? You hypocrite. First take the log out of your own eye, then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your neighbor's eye. What Jesus is dealing with here isn't a Christian tendency, it's not a Jewish tendency, it's a human tendency to zero in on other people's garbage before our own, right? You run a race, you take 100th, you feel better when you see 800 people did worse than you did, right? Like this is kind of the way humanity works. It's easy to be a deconstructionist. And what Jesus is pointing out here is we don't play that way. I think by the nature of starting this and everything we're experiencing, there's a growing dislike in me for industries that just deconstruct. And I recognize that there's a place for them. But like take sports commentators. It's really starting to bug me. Because maybe I'm jealous, but I look at them and I read their stuff and I go, you get to make your whole careers, you make your whole living, doing nothing. You don't have to dribble a basketball or catch a football or hit a baseball or block a hockey puck. You don't have to, run till you barf in the off season. You just have to point out when other people do it wrong. And while I recognize, of course, that there's a place for those occupations in our economy, I'm just trying to state the obvious here that I think that's what Jesus is getting after. Is avoid the human tendency to be really good about what's wrong with others and not deal with your own stuff. And can't you see Jesus pressing in on this green revolution stuff on this level? Like it's really easy to pontificate and to speak eloquently about all the things that BP is doing wrong in the Gulf. And not ask, hey, what are you doing with your plastics? Like it's really easy to speak really eloquently and sound really green, and talk about big box stores and all those different things, and not be dealing with your own stuff. I think Jesus would say, clean up your own garbage first. Deal with your own stuff first. Avoid the tendency to think you're an expert because you can talk about it, and you can point out what the big corporations are doing wrong. And for those of you that go like, isn't it a little superficial? Maybe you're a little cynical about the whole idea. I would suggest to you that Jesus would say, not the point. I think Jesus would elevate the conversation and go, does God or does he not call us to steward creation, to take care of it, to look after it? Whether or not the small decisions you make yield universal global benefits, I think Jesus would say it's kind of a secondary conversation. My movement is of a people who start internally, deal with their own stuff, and then hope that a bit of the created order also gets cleaned up in the process. You've probably heard the statement, love the sinner and hate the sin. I would suggest to you that that's a really terrible paraphrase of what Jesus says here in Matthew 7. If we're going to get a little more literal, I would say Jesus says, love the sinner and hate the sin in yourself. Jesus has a habit of going, let's talk about you, and then let's move out from there. The second thing in terms of relevance here, I want to go to Matthew 6. Jesus says, beware of practicing your piety before others in order to be seen by them. For then you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. Jesus, it would seem, also had a habit of pressing in on the human tendency to be superficial. In fact, if you're new to the Bible and looking for a place to read in the Bible, I would say go to Matthew 5, 6, and 7 and just dwell there for about 6 months, because what you get is the gospel writer Matthew kind of condensing Jesus' whole teaching into a few chapters. And in chapter 5, what you get is Jesus saying, here's what the heart of the kingdom bringer looks like. The person who lives in the kingdom, not in some future day, but today. Here's the character, the ethos, the way in which they live. Here's what it looks like. And then in chapter 6, Jesus begins to warn what will destroy the kingdom heart. And he talks about two things. The second thing is an uncontrolled need for financial security and for stuff. And the first thing he talks about, which is what we just read from, beware of practicing your piety before others in order to be seen by them, for then you'll have no reward from your Father in heaven. He unpacks that if you get too caught up in what other people think about you, it'll ruin your kingdom heart. Jesus spends a lot of energy pressing in on this issue of hypocrisy. We throw it around now because it's such a cultural word. Jesus is really the one that engineered its use the way we use it. It referred to an actor in a Greek theater. Someone who wasn't necessarily the part, the way we would think of an actor, but could play the part. I think Jesus would say, be careful of being superficial here. And particularly for those of us that are like teens or 20-somethings. I can't even include myself in that anymore. Wow, it's a bad day. Okay, good. I think we got to come to grips with the fact that being green is sexy right now. It just is, right? It's cool. It's neat. And I think Jesus would say, watch out. Like, be careful. Don't make it about another cultural acceptance thing. Don't make it about another cool thing. Do it because it's real. To me, being proud of my bamboo shirt because it's, eco-sustainable, but I drop my glass in the garbage can, there's something superficial about that. Buying a Prius because of its environmental advantages while not recycling my plastic, kind of superficial. Because one gets me recognized as green and the other doesn't. No one's going to know if I recycle my plastics unless you announce it to a couple hundred people. Then everyone knows, right? I think Jesus would say, be careful. Don't be superficial. And then lastly, the last thing that I want to press in on here, and I don't really have a verse, is I think this is a time where we got to embrace Jesus' patience with us. In fact, I wouldn't give you a verse. What I would hand you is the Bible. And I would say, look at this and read the narratives of this and see a God who is patient. Read about Abraham, who is the hero of the faith and twice sold his wife into slavery. Read about David, who did so much good for the kingdom of God, and yet, by all appearances, was a terrible husband and a terrible father. Read about Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived, and yet, by the end of his life, was a military tyrant in every respect that we would think of them today. Read about the disciples, who spent 3 years with Jesus, and yet needed some advantages that many of us won't get in our lifetime to really understand who Jesus was and what he was about. I hope if you walk with us with any consistency, you would see that our bent around here is that when we look at the text, God is a patient God. Always encouraging with the progress you've made, and always encouraging you to go further. Never content with where you're at, but always celebrating where you're at, and always inviting you to experiencing him better and on a deeper level. And so with this green stuff, and we're going to talk a little bit about some how-tos in a moment, I would say be patient with yourself. No one's asking you to be a poster child by tomorrow or next week or ever. So we got this song, and I invite you to laugh.
I'm gonna make a change for once in my life. It's gonna feel real good, gonna make a difference, gonna make it right. As I turn up the collar on a favorite winter coat, this wind is blowing my mind. I see kids in the street with not enough to eat. Who am I to be blind, pretending not to see their needs? A summer's disregard, a broken bottle top, and a one-man soul. They follow each other on the somebody's broken heart and a washed out dream. They follow the pattern of the wind, you see, 'cause I got no place to be. That's why I'm starting with me. I'm starting with the man in the mirror, and I'm asking him to change his ways. And no message could have been any clearer. If you want to make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and then make a change. I'm starting with the man in the mirror, and I'm asking him to change his ways. And no message could have been any clearer. If you want to make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and then make a change. Na 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 na. It's gonna feel real good, come on. Na 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 na.
Good job, you guys. So that's our way of making fun of ourselves and making a point all at the same time. Okay. And I saw you smiling again, Kevin. Kevin was protesting Michael Jackson, and I think he had fun. Same with Jason, the drummer. Don't be a hater. Okay. I just want to spend a few moments talking in some like handles kind of way, like some stuff that we can actually get our hands on and actually do something. So let's talk reduce. Phantom energy. Have you heard of phantom energy? Phantom energy is energy that puts a bandit thing on and runs around your house at night while you're sleeping. Phantom energy refers to the energy that you use, that an appliance uses when you're not using that appliance. And everything that I read says that upwards of 25% of the average power bill is spent on phantom energy. So what we're talking about here is obviously clocks and things like that on VCRs and DVD players and microwaves. We're talking about cell phone chargers that are plugged into the wall, but the phone's not plugged into them. We're talking about computers that the screen's off, but the hard drive and the internal guts of the thing are still working. It's a major part of what you can do in terms of a handle that you can work with. Power strips are one of the things that they really talk about, especially if there's, like TVs, a second TV that you rarely use or something. They talk about putting stuff in a power strip so you can turn it off. There's this deal, you may or may not have heard of it. Northwestern Energy will give you a free energy audit. It's really cool. My family did it this winter. They come to your house and they spend about 4 hours there and kind of, they do lots of stuff. I got a free hot water heater wrap out of the deal. It was awesome. But they just analyze your use of energy and suggest how you can change that. Like, for example, we have a freezer in our garage that we keep deer meat in, and I didn't think anything of it. Well, the guy said that freezer actually is designed to have an anti-frost cycle in it, and so all winter long, because I had it outside in an unheated garage, the anti-frost cycle was running. We have a Oric air purifier that we run during the winter because we like to think it keeps us from getting sick. And the guy looked at my wife and said, "Do you run that all the time?" She said, "Yep." He said, "You won't after you get your audit. It's in the closet." We can talk about CFLs. I know there's some controversy here, but nonetheless, they use 75% less energy than a normal bulb. And there's some, they're pretty gnarly if they get broken, but Home Depot now recycles them free of charge, so you can deal with that. Let's talk about gas mileage. Just a couple practical things. Your air pressure in your tires. They say that the average American automobile wastes 9 cents a gallon by simply having underinflated tires. There's some ratio. You can find it on energy.gov. We're going to hand you a worksheet as you walk out, by the way, with lots of this and more on it, websites and all that, simply because the tires are underinflated. You can also not speed. So drive 55 and take the fish off the back of your car, because that results in a net loss when you drive 55 with a fish on your car. Okay. Junk mail. There's a website that we'll point you to that you can go to this website. It takes you about 5 minutes and unsubscribe to mass marketing stuff, so when people buy mailing lists, it gets you off those mailing lists, I think for 5 years before you have to renew it. And then also, obviously, calling the magazine from the lady who owned our house before us. She must have used half the house as a closet, because every company out there that makes clothes for females, we get the magazine in the mail. So you got to pick up the phone up and call them, which I have not done yet. Because my wife, she's expensive. She buys a lot of clothes. Just kidding. Let's talk about reusable grocery bags. Let me show you a picture. Several countries, I believe China and India being two of them, have completely banned disposable grocery bags. There's several states, I think there's 3 now, that there's laws in place that they have to charge a nickel deposit for every disposable garbage bag they give out. Because of that, Sarah was researching it, and she found that in some third world countries, people actually make their living harvesting reusable grocery bags. Like it's an occupation that they then in turn, so we could go like, well, Adam, that's good. And I go, yeah, it's kind of, making lemonade out of lemons. Oh yeah, what I was going to say there is there's these things you can buy. I think the base camp carries them. There are these bags called Chico bags, if you don't want to carry the big Walmart ones everywhere, the reusable ones that you get. They're about this big, and my wife carries hers in her purse. $5. Anyway. Okay, where are we at? Water bottles. If you know me, you know that I have a little bit of a thing for these. So I'm just going to give you a visual. This is really gross because I wasn't very smart last service. It's an ironic illustration as I pour oil all over the stage. They say, reading an article this week, smarter this time, Joe. Put it back in the oil can. Lenny does it on the keyboard, I do it on the table. They say that take any bottle of, disposable water bottle, fill it a quarter full of oil, and that's representative of the amount of energy used to bottle every bottle like this. Because of the plastic and the energy that goes into making the plastic, the recycling the plastic, if it gets recycled, bottling the water, all that stuff. And so frankly, I think one of the most practical things you can do on this whole end is carry a water bottle around with you and filter water if you have to, but 90% of those go unrecycled. And I think it was a $15 billion industry in 2009. It's a big footprint. Oh yeah, I left this over here. Okay, before we talk about recycle, I want to throw a few stats at you just to kind of, I think it's really easy to tap out and go like, really? 2.5, yeah, I don't know, I have any idea what you said, but that's good. 2.5 acres of rainforest are burned every second. In 2007, that number was 1.5 acres. 75% of the rivers in China are polluted. Polluted in this study deals with like completely unsuitable for human life. In fact, the World Health Organization says that by 2020, if something doesn't change in China, there will be 20 million environmental refugees, which is also part of what we have coming, by the way, a whole new category of refugees. Like we're familiar with refugees from war and from tribal conflict. We're familiar with refugees from mudslides and landslides and earthquakes and tsunamis. There's a whole new category coming, mostly in our kids' lifetimes, of environmental refugees, where you have huge expanses of land and water that are completely unusable because they're so polluted. The World Health Organization estimates that 2.4 million people per year die from air pollution. 1.5 of that is internal, inside air pollution. There's 50 distinct species go extinct every year. There's a professor from Harvard that says we're in the midst of the 6th big extinction, because it's just unheard of, at least for a long, long time, of the amount of extinction that we're seeing going on right now. This is plants, this is bugs, this is animals. And here's the one, if you just want to boil it down and get practical and don't want to get into the philosophical debate, here's the one that kind of blows me away. Americans produce 80% more trash than we did 15 years ago, and there are 80% fewer landfills. So if all you look at it is from a practical kind of math standpoint, you can see that what we're doing simply isn't sustainable. It's just simply not sustainable. So let's talk some tools. There's a very cool website called Earth 911. You can go to it, you type in 59601 as the zip code, and you can go like used antifreeze. And it'll tell you where in Helena you can take used antifreeze free of charge. You can go to it and, literally you type in anything you want, and if it's offered for free, they'll tell you. Except for, we couldn't find anybody in town who took single-use batteries, which, by the way, are terrible. And we actually, Sarah found that Batteries Plus actually takes them, and so she's going to email them and tell them to get Batteries Plus on there for their reusable batteries. But this is a really cool website. We also put this together for you. It'll be on the sheet as you walk out. I think this is kind of adapted from something that the city puts out. But there's this, graph. As citizens of both Clancy, Montana City, and or Helena, you have really remarkable resources to you for free that you're paying for in your tax dollar. If you have a dump pass, the only thing you can't take to the city really is plastic. So, and if you're not a citizen, you don't own a house, you don't have a dump pass, then you can use the ones in the parking lots. And again, we'll get you that. Okay, and then there's this other thing. There's an organization in town that does curbside recycling. You pay for it. We just wanted to give you a chance to hear from this guy and what their organization does.
Our business name is Helena Recycling. We've actually been in business since April of 2009, so just a little over a year. We provide a curbside recycling business, and meaning we come to you to pick up your recyclables. We pick up everything aluminum, we pick up tin, so like your soup cans or your bean cans. We also do plastics. We're now doing Pete 1 through Pete 7. So before we were only doing Pete 1 and Pete 2. Now we're doing them all. We also take all types of papers, so your newspapers, your office paper, magazines, and cardboard. Essentially, how we do it is we give you 3 bins, and they're 18-gallon bins, which is plenty for even like a family of 5 or 6. One bin is labeled plastic, one bin is labeled aluminum and tin, the other bin is labeled paper. And so you don't need to separate your plastics, they all go into one bin. Your aluminum and tin go into one bin, and all your paper goes in the other bin. All the cardboard needs to be broken down, and it's placed underneath the bins. Our pickups are bi-weekly, so every other Saturday. And obviously we're doing a special for the church at $12 a month. We bill quarterly, we can bill annually. We don't have electronic billing, but we're going to start that soon, like a PayPal or something in that regards. You can use your own bins, or we can provide you with the bins, and there's a one-time setup fee for 3 bins for $35. You can set them pretty much anywhere, and we'll come and get them within reason.
Sure.
We're trying to make it easy on the customers, because, people say, well, recycling sometimes is an inconvenience. Because they don't want to separate things, or they don't want to put them out on the curb. So, if you put them on your porch, I'll run up and grab them, or my people will.
Okay, so, helenarecycling.org, I believe, and you pay in advance. We simplified the bin thing for you, should you want to do this, whether you want to subscribe to them or just get bins and start taking them to the transfer station yourself. Sarah went to Walmart for you and picked up about 20 bins. I think they're $5 each is what we're into, and we're just going to return the ones we don't sell tomorrow. So it was just kind of practicing what we're preaching of, trying to make it really, really easy. So those are available for you on that end, because you're all going $35. I could provide my own bins for like a quarter of that. So you can. Okay, you guys, let me kind of land this whole conversation over the last 5 weeks. I hope for some of you who being outside has been a spiritual thing for you for a long time, I hope you feel validated. I hope that you see an invitation to know the God of the Bible via being outside. For those of you who maybe are at this spiritual stalling place, I hope what we've given you are some tools and some resources to kickstart that, some means of spiritual growth by not just grabbing another book or another study, but actually getting outside and paying attention and being still and learning some disciplines that you need to abide with God anyway. I hope too that we've depoliticized it a little bit and taking the conversation from global warming to, wait a minute, does God call us to take care of it or not? So I hope we've depoliticized it in those ways. I hope also that you see that there's a remarkable chance here to be everything that we're trying to be as Narrate, as a community together, to tell God's story by the way we live. Because there are a plethora of people in our community who they don't even have a grid for a Christ follower who actually cares about creation, who actually takes environmental stewardship seriously. They assume as readily that Christian means anti-environment as quickly as they assume Christian means Republican, And there's this remarkable opportunity to tell a different story about a God who says, I want to put it back together, and that's not just limited to humans, it extends to all of creation. For some of you, I hope if you started with us in this series not knowing God, that this series has helped you in that end. To see that there's this God who wants to be present with you and walk with you, to forgive you of sin, and invite him into your life. So let me just close this up in prayer. This, where you're at in the solitude of your chair and the overflow of the theater next door. Talk to God about whatever it is you're thinking. If you're someone who is starting a relationship with God for the first time or wants to, tell him that. Confess sin. Acknowledge the atoning work of the cross, the forgiveness that comes via Jesus and the cross. Invite him to be your leader. God, I'm so thankful, God, that knowing you isn't all about the intellect. And that knowing you isn't all about these like culturally irrelevant practices far removed from our culture. But that the gospel speaks to culture, God. That you speak to our times and to our situations and invite us to bring your truth and your wisdom into those times. God, I pray that there's people in our community who in the next months and years would begin to follow you. Because some people, some friends of theirs began to embrace the responsibility that is ours as caretakers of your creation. And then in that process, God, they reopened the conversation about you and your dreams for the world and your desires for people. Pray for people in the room this morning desiring relationship with you, that you'd bring people alongside them to help them in that end. We love you, Jesus. It's in your name we pray. Amen. A couple things before you go. Don't forget those bins if you want to grab those and simplify things, because we could all use getting saved a trip to Walmart, right? That's not a shot against Walmart. It's a shot against the parking lot. And then also don't forget that sign-up sheet if you want to help pull tags off trees this weekend. Love you guys.